While a written word might have multiple definitions, we can usually determine its intended meaning through context. In speech, however, a word can take on additional layers of meaning. Tone of voice, the relationship between speakers, and expectations of where a conversation will go can imbue even words that seem like filler with vital information. This is where and come in. Or a and tutoa, and ito, and anyo. Linguists call these filled pauses, which are a kind of hesitation phenomenon. And these seemingly insignificant interruptions are actually quite meaningful in spoken communication. For example, while a silent pause might be interpreted as a sign for others to start speaking, a filled pause can signal that you're not finished yet. Hesitation phenomena can buy time for your speech to catch up with your thoughts.
It's rare to find an adult who actively still wonders what their parents think. But that isn't to say that we aren't wondering about our value in more general terms. It's just that we may, without noticing, have taken the question somewhere else, and very often, to particularly harsh modern figures of authority, media and social media. To this pitiless arena, the self-doubting person now directs all their fears of unworthiness and panicked desire for reassurance. To a system set up to reward sadism and malice, they constantly raise their phones and implicitly ask, "Do I deserve to exist? Am okay? Am beautiful or respectable enough?" And, because social media is built on the troubles of the individual soul, the verdict is never a reliable yes. One is never done with cycles of fear and reassurance seeking. Every time their spirits sink, which is often, the self-doubting sufferer picks up their phone and begs to know whether they have permission to go on.
There is no denying that the concept of family has certainly changed in American society over the last few decades. Statistics continue to show that fewer Americans are getting married, and those who do so are having fewer children or none at all. More marriages are ending in divorce. More people are living alone, cohabiting with someone, or marrying more than once in a lifetime and creating stepfamilies. Traditional families once dominated every neighborhood. A traditional family consists of a husband and wife, plus their children, whether biological or adopted. If they have any today, American society displays greater diversity, and many American households can be considered non-traditional under this definition. Family structures that may be considered non-traditional or alternative include single parenthood, cohabitation, same-sex families, and polygamy. Let's take a brief look at each of these. A lot of people in the United States are coffee drinkers. Over the last few years, a trend has been developing to introduce premium specially blended coffees known as gourmet coffees into the America market. Boston seems to have been the birthplace of this trend. In fact, major gourmet coffee merchants from other cities like Seattle, San Francisco, came to Boston, where today they are engaged in a kind of coffee war with Boston's merchants. They are all competing for a significant share of the gourmet coffee market. Surprisingly, the competition among these leading gourmet coffee businesses will not hurt any of them. Experts predict that the gourmet coffee market in the United States is growing and will continue to grow to the point that gourmet coffee will soon capture a half of what is now a $1.5 million market and will be an $8 million market by 1999. Studies have shown that coffee drinkers who
its leaves and assess the qualities of sunlight streaming outside. Observing the timing of biological events in relation to changes in season and climate is called phenology. When you notice the daffodil buds are poking through the snow and think spring is on its way, you're using phenology. When you see leaves turn from green to red, and watch migrating birds fly past, and realize that summer is over, autumn is here, you're using phenology. Literally meaning, the science of appearance, phenology comes from the Greek words, pheno, to show or appear, and logos, to study. Humans have relied on phenology since the time of hunters and gatherers. We've watched changes in seasons to know when to plant and harvest food and when to track migrating animals. Scientists observe and document seasonal changes in nature and look for patterns in the timing of seasonal events. Timing of these natural signs has remained consistent until recently.
Similar pattern of wide and narrow range, just like that barcode. We get to the point where we can just look across samples. Okay, there's 1580 and there's 1735. We know where those difficult years are. We able to look at the records in the rings. And from that reconstruct streamflow much further back than we can just with historical records. In some areas under the best conditions were the best species, we can have up to 10,000 years record from tree rings. We have maybe 5,200 years historical records from the rivers around here. We have trees and go back several hundred years. If you look at the Weaver River, we have about 100 years of record. To gives us a rough idea of how long droughts of Benin have severely been, but it's only 100 years record and the trees have been around for 600 or 700 or more years. How can they give us a much longer record of those droughts? Sometimes as we look in the tree rings we see droughts that are much longer, much more severe than anything we see in the Biologists need to know what animals do if they're going to save them. Are those animals social or solitary? How much space do they need and how many mates do they have? Sometimes you can't predict the outcome of the research. Fernando Notboom started out being interested in how birds know what to sing. Yet his research eventually led to a complete overhaul of the entire field of neurobiology, a totally unanticipated yet utterly monumental effect. And this is the course textbook by John Alcock. The fact that this is in its 9th edition tells you how fast in a field animal behavior is. There are lots of new developments.
This kind of approach is kind of the way some students approach preparing for standardized tests. In order to get test scores to go up, teachers will end up teaching to the test. Now, that approach can work, test results often do go up. But it fails the fundamental goal of education, to prepare students to succeed over the long term. So given these obstacles, what can we do to transform the way we transform organizations? So rather than being exhausting, it's actually empowering and energizing. To do that, we need to focus on 5 strategic imperatives, all of which have one thing in common: putting people first. The first imperative for putting people first is to inspire through purpose. Most transformations have financial and operational goals. These are important and they can be energizing to leaders, but they tend not to be very motivating to most people in the organization. To motivate more broadly, the transformation
You could argue this kind of digital detox would be beneficial. We'd take our eyes off our screens, then strike up real-life conversations with each other. We've discovered that our smartphones can actually make phone calls. We bring back fax machines and start making notes by hand. Well, maybe not fax machines, and hey, we'd still have TV to entertain, as the world would not fall apart. In fact, with almost 4 billion people having no access to the internet worldwide, half of humanity wouldn't notice a difference in the short term. But not you, mighty internet user. You would notice right away. If the internet suddenly flatlined, social media users would start calling each other on the phone, overloading the working telecommunication systems, unless cell phone towers and telephone lines were also shut down. Then you'd go back to writing letters and sending them via post. Forget about wireless file transfers with no Wi-Fi.
I understand your professor has been discussing several eastern woodland Indian tribes in your study of Native American cultures. As you have probably all learned, the eastern woodland Indians get their name from the forest-covered areas of the eastern United States where they lived. The earliest woodland cultures date back 9,000 years, but the group we'll focus on dates back only to about 700 AD. We now call these Native Americans the Mississippian culture, because they settled in the Mississippi River Valley. This civilization is known for its flat-topped monuments called temple mounds. They were made of earth and used as temples and official residences. The temple mounds were located in the central square of the city, with the huts of the townspeople built in rows around the plaza. The Mississippian people were city dwellers. But some city residents earned their living as farmers, tending the fields of corn, beans, and squash that surrounded the city.